Let me just present you very briefly our speakers today. So our speaker today is Anne-Caroline Prévôt, and she's a research professor at the research laboratory called CESCO, or CESCE, which is situated at the Muséum National d'Histoire Naturelle in Paris. And Anne-Caroline, she works in particular on questions. She's an ecologist and a conservationist and a biologist, and she works in particular on questions that regard this, what we could sort of call the proximity relations between humans and nature, and in the interface between ecology and social psychology. And she's the co-author of one book from 2017 called The Souci de la Nature, Apprendre, Inventer, Gouverner. But most importantly, she has very recently published a book called La Nature à l'œil nu, or Nature with a Naked Eye, that came out with CNRS edition just this year. So, if you go, oh, by the way, if you go onto the Maison Française's website, you will see that next week, for those who are here from Oxford, there are a couple of events that involve Anne-Caroline and her work here at the Maison Française next week as well. So she's really someone who over this week and the next is very prominently featured at the Maison Française. So, but let me just welcome Anne-Caroline, and let me get into it. So I think the first thing I wanted to ask you about is simply about yourself, and if you could tell us a little bit about what it is that you do, because and the work that you've done and how you came about to do it, because it is somewhat surprising in many ways what it is that you're doing, and you're working in the crossfield between a whole bunch of disciplines. So I think it's probably best if you try yourself to explain what it is that you're up to, so to speak, with your studies of experiences of nature. So over to you, Anne-Caroline.
Thank you, and hello everyone. I'm very happy to be here together with you from Paris. And so as you said, I'm a researcher coming from ecology and ecology as a science, and I'm trained as ecologist. And I can say now that I'm a conservation biologist because I'm very much interested in the future of biodiversity and nature, as we will call it, and tell about that all during this hour. And I started my research in studying the functioning of ecological systems and how humans and human activities impacted this functioning, and notably, for example, the dynamics of animal populations, or even the functioning of pond ecosystems and so on, due to introduced species. And then I used to be very much interested in the ordinary nature, ordinary biodiversity, so the species that were in contact in our ordinary lives as humans. And but as a conservation biologist, I used to consider humans only as the potential and negative impact they have on biodiversity, but it was like a black box. So humans, and then other impacts forces like climate or something else. And I think 10 years ago, I started to think and to say to myself that I cannot just deal with this considering humans as a black box. It was not possible anymore for me. So I started to ask some researcher coming from the social and human sciences to help me think why humans, men and women, continued and keep going, impacting negatively biodiversity, because it was the way I was from. And then I started working with some anthropologists and communication scientists and sociologists, and I discovered what is conservation psychology and social psychology. And this field of research, conservation psychology, is indeed a field of research coming from social psychology and education psychology in the US and Northern Europe. And they were very much interested by the way human societies impact nature. And for them, humans as individuals were interested, and nature was a black box. So I just discovered that when you share both and you just give some conservation biology together with conservation psychology, then it can be interesting because you open the black box. So that's why I started to work in conservation psychology together with the conservation psychology. And first I was I started to work in that in between, thanks to Susan Clayton, who is an American conservation psychologist. I was working with her for a long time and still now, and that's it. But yeah, I can just go in and keep saying that it's very interesting to work in between these different fields, research fields. It takes time because this interdisciplinary research in France, at least, there's so many people that say that it's very important, but it's very complicated to do that. And it takes time to be able to understand the way the other people speak and the way the other researchers think, and all these theoretical backgrounds, and how every different disciplines just tries to invent, not to invent, but to find some results and to find some interesting results.
So the people that you would generally be working with or talking to are either sociologists or conservationists. Is that it? So yeah. So, and they don't have the same languages. I can certainly understand that. That must be very difficult to find a way between these various languages, or especially also when you work on these matters in different national contexts, because they're also, I mean, for all disciplines, that also goes for my own discipline in philosophy. I mean, the language of philosophers on the other side of the Atlantic is entirely different from what we find in France. And I guess that also worked for sociology. I don't know whether it works for conservationists and ecologists, or whether there is a sort of a common language that allows you to work with each other across the Atlantic. But these linguistic issues are certainly important.
I think for the ecologists, it's much simpler because we use math as another way of
math.
That's nice.
It's like it's like in the 17th century.
We don't have specific words.
So when I looked around in your work, so the central concept that came up here again and again and again is this notion of experiences in nature. So in a bit, I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions that sort of go deeper into this particular notion. But maybe first you can tell us a little bit about how that particular notion of experiences of nature fit into the work that you do. And perhaps, one of the things I came to think of today was that it was sort of unclear to me whether you use this notion as a descriptive one or as a normative one, or whether you see it as good or bad, or just something that you use it to describe particular things. And also where it comes from. I mean, is it your own notion, or is it a notion you have borrowed from other researchers, or is there a whole researcher field sort of established around experiences of nature within your own field?
Actually, as a conservation biologist, I said I'm very much interested, well, not interested, but I want to, it's like a normative way of thinking of, but I want to preserve biodiversity. So and why? It's not because just I want to. It's because I think I'm convinced by the IPBS message. For example, I don't know if you know the IPBS, but IPBS is the IPCC devoted to biodiversity and ecosystem services in the world. And I just wanted to say to you, and the third message of the IPBS in 2009 2019, so 2 years ago, and they said that the biodiversity is declining throughout the world, but they said also, and I quote them, I read them here just now, they said that goals for conserving and sustainably using nature and achieving sustainability cannot be met by current trajectories, and goals for 2030 and beyond may only be achieved through transformative changes across economic, social, political, and technological factors. And this is very important for me now, for these 2 last years. And so it's not just my own willing or the willing of conservation biologists. There is an assembly of international scientists that said that we cannot sustainably keep going, living as we are living now in the modern societies.
No.
And the IPBES, they go on saying that these transformative changes include changes in the paradigm and the values of how we value nature, as nature equal biodiversity here. So we can speak more about that, and how we are in relation to this biodiversity. So this is the first point. And then, but before this message, all the community of conservation biologists, they, for at least 40 years, they started saying that that the humans and human activities in general, they are impacting negatively biodiversity, and the biodiversity. So, okay, the number of species and the number of individuals in the species, but more importantly, the relationship and the interrelation the individuals, humans and non-humans, have with each other, and the sustainability of the habitats and ecosystems we need as humans and we use as humans. And in the 1980s, something like that, when ecologists named Robert Pyle and proposed in a very essay essay, proposed a concept that he named the extinction of experience of nature. And he said that maybe the main causes of the extinction of biodiversity and the biodiversity crisis is the apathy that humans start to have with nature. That is, they know nature, but they don't care anymore. So this essay and this hypothesis was not really much read and reworked with for 20 or 30 years. And now for 10 years now, in my community of conservation biologists, we are speaking about the extinction of experience. And so 5 years ago, when we decided together with Susan Clayton, for example, decided to study and to name this experience of extinction of experience and what is extinction of experience, then we discovered that experience of nature, the experience was not really much studied and defined. So we decided to start and to try to define what is experience of nature for us. Mm-hmm. And just to answer your first question, so for me, experience of nature is a way to describe phenomenon, a relation or relations, the diversity of relations we as humans can have with non-human living beings.
Okay, so non-human living things. So now we sort of get into the first questions that the first questions that I had. I find it quite striking that you as a conservationist, you are at this point, where it's no longer possible at all to just do descriptive work. Everything you do is necessarily normative. It's a curious situation to find yourself in as a scientist, that every question you ask is about should and not should, and never about what is. But maybe I'll get into this, get a little bit closer to this notion of experiences of nature, because when you come at it from from the kind of perspective that I come at it from as someone who's trained in philosophy. The first thing you think about is just, what does these notions even mean? And the first notion, so first I have a question to you about nature, and then after that I will have a question to you about experience, what it means more precisely, and what will fall onto those notions. So especially with relation to nature, some of the things that come through. I mean, I remember we had the first conversation we had some months ago about what you were doing. You gave a bunch of examples of experience of nature, and one of the experiences of nature that you talk about, that you gave me, was kind of surprising. You said, well, it can also be like, you know, the grass that grows between that grows up from the sidewalk, and which can, you know, it can be tiny little things like that. And that kind of answer from you immediately prompts the question for me: when is an experience of nature rather than something else? Because on the one hand, if you go to the park, say, that is a kind of an experience of nature, but it's the nature that is already laid out and organized for your consumption, as it were, and has been transformed in many ways. And you can go further and further in the transformation of things and get all the way down to the point where you can say, well, you know, concrete and glass and plastic are all also experiences of nature, because it's experiences of, you know, transformed cement and sand and, you know, fossilized plants in plastic. So where exactly does these limits of what is nature and what is not go for you when you work within this area? Or is it not really a problem that comes up for you?
Of course, it's a problem. It's a question, but for me, it's all what you said is you can put it in the continuum. But if I should define nature for me, it's equal to the scientific term biodiversity. So that is living beings or living things. So species or individuals, plants, animals, mushrooms, and so on, and bacteria that are living. Living, that is living with a reproduction and death, and a living phase. And this nature or biodiversity is living by itself without any needs coming from humans. And it's not an enemy, or it's not a friend from humans, just living. And we as humans can be in interaction with them, with all these species and all these individuals, but no needs for the non-humans living beings. They don't need humans. On the contrary, we need this biodiversity and this nature to live, because in our way of life, we use nature every day to live, even just for food and to eat something. And so there is some kind of it's like a discrepancy, or we are not in the same position, humans and the rest of the livings. And but yes, so after that, can we say that oil is biodiversity? Okay, oil is made of past biodiversity, but it's not anymore nature or biodiversity in the sense I'm working on now. And what about all these small plants growing in the sidewalk? These plants corresponds to the definition I just gave. Mm-hmm. But it's a living beings, and it's it's not a friend, it's not an enemy from humans, and it doesn't care about, it doesn't need human to live. So for me, it's biodiversity. But even the plant, and of course it's a continuum, because the plants, well, the flowers that are planted in a urban park. And then, is it nature? Yes, of course, it's living beings, and they can live without humans, except that some cannot reproduce without humans, just right here in the north when it's exotic plants. So it can be its nature, but is it the nature conservation biologists would normatively want to protect? I'm not sure, but it depends on the objectives of the nature we want to have all around our living places, for example.
So there's this way. So if you work, so here you have like a definition of nature that is defined as that you define it as a conservationist. And then if you go to the other side and you talk to the sociologists and to the social psychologists, would they mean the same thing by nature when you speak about the experiences of it? And also, especially if you look at social cultural factors, I mean, it depends on if you go out and ask people, whoever in the street, there will be a lot of variation in what, if you go and ask them, what is nature for you? For example, I presume a lot of people will think that geological formation, say Ayers Rock, is a natural thing, right? But according to your definition, it's not. So I was just wondering, would you? I mean, doesn't that create problems for your research sometimes, that you would have to sort of navigate between more like your own sort of scientific definitions of what will count as nature, and then more social and cultural conceptions of what nature is? Is that something that poses problems for you when you have to sort of figure out what experiences of nature is and how to say relate them to others also?
I don't know exactly what you mean with the problems. It's maybe it can. I am personally aware of the different definitions of this term for all the colleagues and researchers I'm speaking with, for sure. And then, but it's the case for the term nature, but it's the case for all the terms and so many terms that we use. And with my professional works, I just define the term and then I use the term after I have defined them, and that's it. But you're right that when when I am in the same kind of seminar here with an interdisciplinary seminar, normally the first question I've been asked after my talk is that, okay, so you are defining nature like that, but there are many different people that then define nature like that, and so many people that think that humans are being part of nature, and some others think that humans are not a part of nature. So what do you think? And I said, okay, but maybe we can just go on, and I just define nature like that, and we can continue and keep discussing for 2 or 3 hours about the definition of the term nature. So, so I just doesn't want to answer your question.
No. Also, I can see. I mean, of course, for us, sort of in philosophy, the question of what is nature is constantly. It's not something that constantly comes up, but we don't really have an answer to it.
No.
It's just that because you have to confront all the time different kinds of definitions, because you work both with conservationists and with sociologists and with normal people that you go out and talk about your work to. That sometimes it must create sort of strange situations or odd discrepancies. I mean, for example, when you defined nature as biodiversity, for me it was sort of, oh, that's a weird definition of nature. But yeah, okay, then you can explain it, of course.
I started working with an anthropologist and PhD students in Africa, in the Senegal, and on the relation, on the memory of nature or nature environment. But in the one of the language used in the Senegal, that is the Wolof, the term nature doesn't exist. So this is interesting for me.
Yeah,
because biodiversity or nature exists for sure, but they don't have a term to name this concept.
I mean,
and this is interesting.
Cut reality at other joints, so it's different. So if we move a little bit on, I mean, all these, similar problems, of course, show up in relation to experience. So what is that one then again, and what will count as experience for you in this? I mean, where these things mostly come up is like was mostly in relation to various forms of experiences of nature that for me seem mediated or inauthentic or something like that. Already, if you go to the park, is that an experience of nature, given that it's not sort of self-sustaining, but say manicured for our consumption? Or if you take it further, if you see a David Attenborough documentary, is that an experience of nature? Or even so this favorite example of mine that I come back to all the time, these because it's just next to you, these things that they have over at the Grand Galerie these days, where you go over and you can see in the gallery for the extinct animals. They have now set up an exhibition where you can go in and you get 3D glasses on. And then you have virtual reality versions of all these extinct animals that run around you within the gallery. It's very impressive, but it's also a little bit flippant because you suddenly find yourself in a natural universe that no longer exists. It's both very sad and strange. It's a very strange kind of experience. But that sort of thing, virtual reality, would that count as experiences of nature for you? And if they do, in what way? And then do you consider them less authentic than other experiences of nature? Or according to which parameters can you sort of classify experiences? Because they are so diverse. I mean, we experience nature in all kinds of ways. So how would you classify them and make distinctions between them?
Yeah, I thank you, because you're completely right. The experience of nature are so diverse, and they are diverse because the nature encountered can be diverse, because individuals are different from each other, and because the social groups or social conditions in which this experience appears and are different and are diverse. So together with Susan Clayton and our students, we try to define the experience of nature as a process, and going in the middle of the process, there is this one or different meetings of one or different individuals, human individuals, with one or different non-humans, living beings. And this meeting is lived and is experienced by different dimensions. We can speak about them afterwards. So cognitive, sensual, affective, body, memorial, social, and so on and so on. So one or different dimensions. And these meetings and this experience is integrated in humans, in individuals, human individuals, based on the individual identity, values, history, feeling, attitudes, and so on. But also on this integration will depend on the nature encountered, of course, and also of the social norms that are prevalent for this individual. So you have these prerequisites for the meeting, and then the meeting or the encounter, and then the impacts and the consequences that this meeting will have, both on the individual, but also potentially on nature and on the social groups. So all this is we name all this experience of nature. So what is important for us is just to keep in mind that these experiences of nature are very diverse, and are as diverse as the number of individuals and the number of different kind of nature and natural elements. And all this diversity is okay. And I just go back to what you said about the normative. I'm normative in saying that my aim, and I feel very important to be aware of having sustainable biodiversity around us and together with us. But I'm not normative about the way to do that. And I don't want I don't know I don't want to give one way to do that. And I would be normative to say that we have so many different ways to do that. But
so
depends,
yeah. So would you say that whatever will count as an experience of nature for those who experience it is just fine?
It just I don't know if it's fine, and that's why I said that for me, experience of nature is a way to describe.
No, I mean, not fine in a sort of normative kind of way, but rather that it's fine in the sense that you will count as an experience of nature whatever anyone experiences and says, I just had an experience of nature. If they say that, you will take their word for it.
Yes, if they said I have an experience, but if they, maybe a simple contact, or for example, going people that just make sport in nature, and nature is just the setting, because it's more easy to make sport and to make a running and footing in a urban park than in your salon or in just a living room. But nature is just a setting. I don't know if it's an experience. If I just have a look on this guy running in the Jardin des Plantes, I don't know if they experience nature. But if this guy says, I have an experience of nature, then I cannot say no. I just, okay, so you have an experience of nature, so please describe it to me.
Okay, so it's sort of, it requires some level of attention or reflexivity or something that you know what it is they're doing.
Yeah,
and now I go out in the forest because I want to be in the forest, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and where that would also work then if you are confronted with experiences that otherwise would not have anything to do with biodiversity. For example, if you sit and play, there was an example I gave you earlier with my at another meeting about my children playing Zelda. You know, the video game Zelda, which had magnificent landscapes in it. And sometimes I'm very struck by, especially, I mean, people who are much younger than myself, and who have lived, sort of grown up with video games and things like that, that they often speak about, and especially when you're talking about like video games like Zelda, or like what's the thing, Animal Crossing, where you built your little island there. And when they come out after having played that for a month and a half, they speak about going swimming and going out in the forest and building house as if it actually happened.
Yeah.
So
actually,
yeah. So for them, that's definitely an experience of nature. And of course, for me, old guy who doesn't know anything about computer games, it's like, no, you have to go out in the park. But you wouldn't work like that. You would say that does count as something that falls within your remit, that falls within the sort of thing that you would study and consider as an experience of nature that has a normative value.
I consider it as an experience of nature, but I would be very much interested in explaining what are the consequences of this experience of nature for the people that are involved in this. And I think it's very important to define also the objectives of when, not as a descriptive, but to be proactive, of to make something with the people and with the society. We should not to be normative, but not to stay just normative as normative and that's it, but to define the objective we have. And if the objective is to make people more aware about biodiversity crisis or the species that surround us, or natural species, then Animal Crossing is not the right way or the best way to do that. But if the objective is to increase human individual well-being or social identity or social links, for example, maybe even Animal Crossing could be okay. Mm-hmm. So it depends on the objectives we have, and most often the objectives are not really well defined. And we think when we discuss together or with practitioner, or that we think that the objectives are the same for everyone, but they are not the same. So And I think, for example, even if we stay in the real, not virtual nature, the being in the forest, being in a urban park could be much more distressing and calming and much better for individuals, for some individuals, than being in the forest, because being in the forests can be threatening and can be, you can have fear in being in the forest when you don't know the forest. So, but for biodiversity reason and for conservationists, the forest seems much better than a urban park. So it depends.
Of course. So just one remark of some of the stuff you said there in the end, that people have different experiences of saying being in the forest. They can be both be you said they can both be distressing and particularly calming. So within the social psychology framework that you have worked, I mean, are there any sort of prevalent or important distinctions that you can make about how people react to nature? Different social groups that will react to nature, different age groups. How does that differentiate out? I mean, which groups would react in which ways? I mean, where do the fault lines lie? Do we have any sort of notion, sort of idea of how that works?
The only answer I could give is that all the works I know have been done and have been conducted in modern societies. So in Northern Europe, North America, maybe Australia, well, some in Japan, but not so many. And so my first answer would be that there are not all the people in the world. So, and there are so many different people and with different relation to our natural environment. But even in these modern societies, I cannot. I personally don't want to make some social groups and to predict that all these social groups will react this way and this way and this way, because I think the importance and the richness of our modern societies is the diversity of the individual relation to nature and individual relation to the others. And then one way to make the world more sustainable is also to acknowledge the richness of all these differences and all this diversity.
Okay, so yeah, and I can understand that, but doesn't it make it difficult if you insist on the individuality of its experience and then the individuality of how different people from different contexts, you can say, okay, there's variations as to how people react to nature, and those have probably something to do with social and cultural and all sorts of contexts. But you don't want to say anything about those contexts and how they affect the way that people experience nature. In that case, I mean, how much social psychology is left? Doesn't doing social psychology on this topic require that you establish some groups and some parameters for how they will react to nature when confronted with it?
Social psychology helped me to just be aware about the impact of social norms. And
so that was basically what I'm asking you about. It's basically which kinds of social norms affect people's way of experiences nature. Is it just the usual suspects, whether they're rich or they're poor, or whether they are
no, okay, so I understand what you mean, but we have some generality saying that in general, people we have had experience of nature when young, then they are more aware of nature and conservation issues when they are environmental issues in general, when they are adults. And people, so this is, I can say that, okay, it's consensual. So now we can say that the experience of nature as young, as a child are important. But they but it doesn't mean that people that didn't have an experience are completely lost, and hopefully, and so that's why I don't like making some assumption and some predictions, because we can change all of our life. So and there are other research that say that predict that urban people could be less concerned by nature than rural people, because they have been less in contact when they were a child. But it's not true, because there are so many diverse people, both in countryside than in cities, that I cannot say that. So that's why I don't like making groups like that.
No, groups and classes and all that. No, I can certainly understand why, from a normative point of view, you want to avoid that. So we're getting sort of to the end of, and there were a couple of questions that I wanted to also ask you about the normative issue and the normative aspects of all this before I will let people ask questions. So just a couple of minutes on that. We already touched upon it a little bit. So there's one little bit here from an interview that you gave to the online web magazine called The Conversation in 2018, and you said the following, where you speak of the importance of creating new collective narratives that will, and here I quote you, that will reattach us to the functioning of nature and the living, to find again the meaning of experiences of nature. Such experiences are so many individual processes of individual transformation that allow each of us to incorporate elements of nature in our personal history and social context. So this is basically the things that we just talked about, this sort of, diversifying and have individual experiences of nature that would allow you to sort of to reattach to nature and create what we call new narratives of how we connect with nature. So there were two questions that arose for me in connection with that. The first is, given that experience is a very fickle thing, and as you've said yourself many times, you can have experiences of nature. Just to have an experience of nature is not necessarily a pleasant experience. It can be a very unpleasant experience to nature as well. So doesn't that mean that let's say from a conservationist or a normative point of view, using experiences of nature to attach people to or create new narratives involves some risk, in the sense that involves some risk that you have to, if you don't, let's say, direct these experiences or lay them out, or let's say, the word that I'm trying sort of circulating around here is the word manipulate. That you manipulate either the nature or the people that you create experiences around in order to ensure that these are positive narratives that you create. So how do you navigate that question of manipulation? Because if you don't want to manipulate people's experiences of nature, you have absolutely no guarantee that experience of nature would have the benefits from a conservationist point of view that you want it to. And if you do manipulate it, there seems some steps of it seems insincere and exactly manipulative. So how do you, from the normative point of view, can you work around these questions of manipulation?
Actually, I'm not completely aware in the same line as many conservationists, because I think that, so how to say that? We are now in a very bad situation socially, and I think so. And because we are living in an unsustainable way, and it cannot go on for long. So, and we already tried so many things, different things to change, and without any success. So so this is the first point. Then we all live to get in natural world and together with nature, and we use it with the definition I already gave. And I am convinced that we all have or have had experience of nature, because we all have been in contact with nature, but we don't use this. We even are not aware of the relationship we have with these non-human livings. So my idea is just to be aware of the relation we have, and then to use this relation and to discuss, to speak about this relation, to be conscious of this relation, even if they are non-pleasant, and then to integrate the relation we have with nature in the way we want to live and in the new way we want to share. Mm. But I'm not sure, and you're completely right, I'm not sure that, and I'm pretty sure that the nature, well, that the biodiversity and nature that will well, I'm not sure that the world we will build in this way will be the same world as the conservation want to be, and I'm sure of the opposite, because the idea is not to make everyone a conservationist, and it's not my point. And I don't want to manipulate people, or if I want to manipulate, I would like to propose and to encourage as many people as possible to just be conscious about the relation they have with nature. That's it. And I'm pretty sure that it will change everything, but I don't know how.
No, that actually makes a lot of sense. That's saying, so if you say that what counts here is not but this reconnection of new narratives and things, it's not this, what counts is not so much whether it's pleasant or unpleasant experiences, it's the awareness of it, no matter what the experience of it. And that have sort of the transformative power here, that we because what you said before, there's this sort of, what did you call it, oblivion of experience, that simply forget that it's there. So simply realizing that it's there, whatever kind of emotion it produces in us will necessarily change our relation. That does make a lot of sense to me. So at this point, we've gone over time in our conversation. I would like to give people the opportunity to ask questions. So for the last 10 minutes here, so for those among you who would like to ask a question, could you please just send the letter Q in the chat, and I will take you in order. Yeah, so I have a first question already from Annette Hugenberger. So Annette, over to you. You should put on your microphone.
Oh, sorry, I clicked on it already. Thank you. I enjoyed the conversation so far. I am a cognitive scientist, and I wonder how people, how they conceive of the concept of biodiversity, because it is actually quite an abstract thing. And we cannot experience biodiversity. We can only experience individual animals or individual plants. So it's a little bit like climate and weather. We cannot experience the climate, we can only experience the weather. And I think this abstractness of the notion of biodiversity is a kind of problem when we reason about it, or when we try to appreciate it and give it the proper attendance it needs. So how can I experience biodiversity and really appreciate it when we as humans are kind of set up to have individual encounters with particular animals or with particular plants? I think there is a mismatch, and that might be the reason why people don't get a good grasp on this concept and appreciate biodiversity.
Thank you. Actually, the term biodiversity is a very scientific term, and that's why I don't use it when I don't speak to the scientists and to researchers. But I don't agree with you that biodiversity or nature is abstract, because we cannot. You said that we cannot experience biodiversity, but we interact with individual plants and animals. For some people, and including myself, some people they can experience with an ecosystems. For example, being in the forest and just being just conscious that there is something, and we don't know what kind of something, what kind of thing, but we know that we experience some kind of relations between individuals and species, plants, animals, trees, mushrooms, and so on. So it's not just an experience with individual plants and animals, but it's an experience with a relationship, and that sometimes we cannot just define, but we just feel. And the other difference between biodiversity, nature, and climate is that when you biodiversity and all the assemblage of species and individuals in a very local locality and local place can change. If you change, you as human change the way you interact with, and this is very different from climate, because in your private garden, if you change the private the way you grow things or the activities you have in the garden, then in 2 years the butterflies, they come back. So this is very different, and this is very you can see it by yourself in 1 year. So this is very different.
Thank you. That's a very positive answer.
Thank you very much. So I have a second question from Olivier de France.
Hello. Thanks a million. You can hear me properly, yes?
Yes.
Wonderful. Yes, my name is Olivier de France. I work in political theory. I'm writing a PhD here at St. Anthony's College. I had a quick question about the notion of milieu, because we mentioned the notion of biodiversity and nature, and I wonder if you use the notion of milieu as a conservationist, as a biologist, and if so, how? Because obviously philosophers and anthropologists use this notion of milieu to basically describe the way that we fashion or manipulate the milieu, which then fashions or manipulates us in return. And some anthropologists use this notion of milieu to square the normative circle in a way, because they say that there is no experience of a milieu that is normatively superior to another, but what is important is to preserve the breadth and depth of these different experiences of the milieu, and make sure that you don't have one experience of the milieu that flattens all the others. In other words, that Zelda and Animal Crossing is one experience of nature, but the important thing is to make sure it doesn't flatten all the others, and that our only experience of nature is Zelda or Animal Crossing.
I don't have any. Well, I don't know how to answer your question, because actually we don't use the term milieu in ecology, and we use the term habitat when we are speaking about, when we are studying a particular species, and then we use the other species as a habitat for this species, for example. But I'm very much interested in speaking about the interactions and interrelated individuals and species that live together.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. This notion of milieu is a very complicated one. I mean, so it's a very tough question. I mean, in terms of it's Georges Canguilhem now, who also has a very elaborate conception of what milieu is as the interface, as it were, between a scientist and his object, and how it's created and how they interact upon each other and things like that. So this is really a question for a philosopher rather than for a historian or for a philosopher of science rather than for an ecologist. But what is quite striking is that you avoid using that term milieu, which is probably wise of you, because you get into trouble if you do, as you have just seen. So I have one more question here, and it will probably have to be the last one. So this is from Hika de Form. I hope my pronunciation is all
yes.
right.
Hi, I'm a undergraduate from Hong Kong, so I'm studying ecology and philosophy together. So my question is something related to environmental education. So I find this problem as a student double majoring in both fields, because actually I agree with a lot of what you've just mentioned. Like there are a lot of diversities when it comes to talking about experiences and our accounts of nature. But one of the difficulties I've observed in my experience is that people from different fields or different forms of life, like put it in a Winstonian way to say that, people from different forms of life find it very hard to communicate and to let other people from other forms of life understand and see that there is actually a different usage of language, of the accounts. And for example, in scientific communities, when scientists, especially like conservation biologists, because we have such a strong normative goal sometimes, that when we hear other people giving out different accounts of nature, for example, from literature or sociology, that the immediate reaction is to say that those accounts are unproductive or wrong. So how do you have any suggestion on how to like reorient or reposition ourselves in relation to like different accounts, and how science community in general could like address this diversity of accounts? Yeah.
Good question. I don't know how to answer, because it's, yes, I agree with you. Sometimes when we are sure about that we are right, then it's completely impossible to just imagine that other people can have other meaning, other way of thinking. Yeah, and for sure, I'm a conservation biologist, so I'm right, and I'm saying that you should conserve biodiversity, but no. It was a joke now, but yes, it takes time to, and it took me time to just to be able to think that the people that don't think like me, they can think, and they can they can be right, and then we can discuss. I think for nature, I think for nature, we all have something to say about nature. And maybe, and it's my willing now to try to do that, but to try to use nature and the relation we can speak about to the other people as the first point. We could think that we could agree in, and we could agree to get all together. I think all people can agree that we need, that nature is important for us. For some people, it will be because they eat for the food, some people because of the way of life, some people for philosophical reasons, for people for leisure, for people, but it's important. So this is the diversity, but nature is important for us. And then we can try to discuss about other things, but it's important that we already agree that we have a common point. That is nature. Well, that could be nature is important for us, or nature is important for humanity in general, or nature is important for, I don't know. And then we can discuss and find a way to discuss and to make other agreements. But I don't know if I answered your question, but it's very difficult. It's very difficult for our own personality to accept that other people can exist. But it's a social question. It's a social point, more general than just for two different disciplines.
Yeah, here in the end, if you worked a bit in political theory, you said something that was quite interesting. This idea that it becomes a common point that we can all agree about, that it's that experience, that nature is important to us. If we do that, basically what you're doing is making conservationism into the foundation of a political project. That's what it becomes immediately if you do that, because it basically you lay down the concern for nature as a sort of almost a sort of a world republican foundation. It's a cosmopolitan project in politics. So yeah, I think that's quite an interesting suggestion from the normative point of view, I think. Okay, so I think we've got in 5 minutes over time now, and we will have to end. But this has been a very, very interesting discussion. So thank you very much, Anne-Caroline.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, and thank you for all your questions and for all of you who were here to listen in on this little conversation. So I just remind you that there will be, you can look it up at the website of the Maison Française, that there will be a third one. I think I will just check very, very quickly, a third conversation this fall, where the last one here will be on the 1st of December with Sarah Dry, a historian of science who has written a book about the waters of the world. So I hope to see some of you for that, and I just have to say to end, to thank you again to Anne-Caroline and to all of you for being here. So thank you and good night.